Good afternoon. I'm Madam Faith Momo, and today we're going to look into this class. We're going to look about oral narratives. About the oral narrative, they are the theories which put forward to explain the origin of oral narratives. So let's look at the origin of oral narratives. The theory is there is the existence of oral artists in society. These are the men or women with creative powers who are able to spin stories and recreate existing ones afresh. These are the people who created the stories we pass from one generation to another. The group work. Groups of people relaxing together spin a story up to logical conclusion. Even today, a class can create a story by simply asking one student to start anyway, and others creative can on in turns until they are logical story. I'm sorry. It is possible that some stories maybe have been deliberated, created in those in authority to valid existing orders of things. Elders, for example, would spin a story to force compliance. Some ordinary happens because distorted and exaggeration such that in them they reach epic and fictional proportions. Many of the legends are likely to have been created this way. Okay, the fear of mystery and the unknown could have led to generation and related stories. That is the reason why the communities living near forests have stories about ogres, and giants, etc. Those living near large rivers and masses of water had stories of mermaids, while those living near deserts would imagine of formidable reptiles. To a creative eye and mind, nature as phenomena that naturally raises curiosity and can easily render itself to a story. The very nature of a tortoise is that way. It is for this reason that different accounts of the same phenomenon are available. Wherever theory is put forward on the origin of the story is acceptable, for at the end of the day, it is these stories that pass on from one generation to another. Altogether, they are the modes of storytelling. In most of the communities, stories were told in the evening around fireplaces as a recreational activity. And it was a taboo to tell stories during the day. Why? Storytelling storytelling sessions were held in the evening to help pass time as people were waiting for their evening meal. Just because it was a taboo to tell stories during the day because during the day people had to work and it may affect the working. This session would involve either adults telling stories to children, adults telling stories to both children and adults, children telling stories to both children, children telling stories to mixed group of children and adults. In telling stories, there was a conventional style of announcing the attention to tell a story. During the storytelling, there is always the storyteller and the audience. So let's look on the roles of the audience. The audience refers to those who listen to the story. They are as important as the storyteller or the narrator. They act as a stimulus or the catalyst to the creating and imagination of the narrator. The mood of the audience directly affects the narrator. They act the narrator. There are two types of audiences. There is the active audience and there is the passive audience. Let's look on the active audience. These are the listeners who are lively during the performance. They remain active throughout the performance. Though, through such action as laughing, nodding, clapping, asking questions, joining in the repetition or singing, showing the appropriate emotion. The passive audience are these listeners are attentive, but they remain dormant. They keenly engage their ears and eyes, but do not play any role in enhancing the liveliness of the performance. Let's look on the qualities of a good storyteller. Is a good storyteller? A good storyteller should be bold in order to stand before the audience, face them, and tell them story freely. A fearful person would shy away from the audience. Thus, his story would not be interesting. Eye contact in any communication is vital for effectiveness rapport building and for the purpose of registering the response of the audience. A good storyteller, a good storyteller would have a good memory in order to recall details of the story. Many of the stories told are adaptations of the old ones, and it is important to remember the plot of the story. Okay, another one. A good storyteller would be creative and imaginative in order to make a story interesting. When an old story is retold imaginatively, it sounds new, fresh, and interesting. A creative storyteller reads the mood of the audience and adapts the story appropriately. For example, one would introduce a song in order to involve the audience. This requires a lot of creativity. A good storyteller also should be interested in various cultures. Stories, like all literature, reflect the culture of the people. For a storyteller to be effective, he should be well versed in a variety of culture so that his stories are within cultural contents of the community in question. A good storyteller should know about the past of these people and also a keen observer of what is happening today so that his stories are dynamic and can appeal to present generations. The artist in society is a bridge between the world of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Uh, another quality of a good storyteller is that a good storyteller should be sensitive in order to ensure that it does offend or embarrass the audience. To be sensitive is to be careful about other people's feelings in a mixed audience in terms of age, sex, and ethnic background. The artist must be very careful not to sound rude or obscene. In certain instances, she'll employ euphemism instead of use of the taboo one. Uh, a good storyteller should be a teacher of morality, so it inflates the necessarily values and practices in the evidence. Mm, I'm sorry. Besides entertainment, oral narratives are expected to teach good morality in society. A good storyteller should be a good in order to keep the audience attentive throughout the performance. Accordingly, he will employ narrative techniques such as dramatization, gestures, facial expressions. Let's look on techniques of storytelling. And to make the story interesting and to keep the audience attentive throughout the performance, the storyteller should employ certain techniques, which include, dramatization. The certain aspects of the story or even parts can be reenacted and reenacted by producers by the narrator for the audience to have a visual insight into how they happened. For example, the narrator would set up the way they had done in a meeting. Use of gestures. This refers to the use of hands to demonstrate actions within an oral narrative. The hands can be used to demonstrate cutting down a tree or drawing objects or lifting. Facial expressions. The face can be used to capture very many feelings and moods like shock, anger, joy, pain, disgust, and suspicion. The narrator his, should use his face to show the audience the feeling of various characters in the story. Tonal variation. The intensity of sound and projection can reflect different tones and moods. The voice can portray urgency, fear, and excitement. Mimicry is the ability to imitate people or animals for the purpose of making fun. The storyteller mimics the character in the story in order to make the story interesting. Involvement of the audience. The storyteller should ensure that the audience is active throughout the story through being involved in such areas as the opening formulas, repetition, singing, asking questions, and any other area that they can come into the story. Use of costumes and decoration. This involves the use of objects to drive home the message, where, for instance, the hare has glued horns to his head in order to attract the mission of animals to horns. The narrator can use small sticks to show these horns. The use of dramatic pause. At a strategic point on the story, the narrator can pause for the effect. Dramatic pause can work best when there is heightened feeling like shock, surprise, and unbelief. These techniques were married together and used where appropriate to make the story real and lively for the audience to enjoy, follow, and understand. Oral narratives can be subdivided into various subgenres as follows. There's the trickster stories, Hogger and the monster stories, explanatory, etiological, or the wise stories, dilemma stories, myths, and legends. The trickster stories, these stories involve trickery, where one character, the trickster, uses its wit to undo another dupe. The trickster is presented as a wise and cunning character, while the dupe is usually foolish and gullible. The, the trickster stories are used to pass a moral message that might not always be right, to encourage children that they can also excel in spite of their size, to encourage the weak in society to fight for their rights in spite of their disadvantage, to show the importance of being wise in society. Sometimes the dupe is depicted as evil, and its defeat is a celebration, good over evil. The explanatory, etiological, or the wise stories. These are called wise stories because they attempt to explain the origin of phenomena. These stories usually end with, and there is why. The Hogger or the monster narrative. Hoggers are characters that have human and have animal. They are super to change from human characters that have the ability to change from human beings to animals. They feed on human beings and have the ability to devour everything that comes to sight. In many of the stories, they appear in human gatherings as perfect human beings, for example, very handsome young men, but later they all turn to ugly man-eating creatures. Myths. Myths are creation stories that trace the origin of communities and the universe in general as having come to supernatural powers. Okay. The dilemma stories. A dilemma is a situation where a character is torn between two things and cannot decide what to do, and the listener or the reader is left to look for the solution. The two or more choices that fact the character or community are usually of a moral nature, requiring critical judgment. Legends or the hero stories. Legends are stories of human character. Okay, sorry. Legends are stories of human characters that lived in the past and exhibited extraordinary qualities. These characters are of superhuman nature, and their exploits are of epic proportions. They believe among the respective communities is that these heroes of historical figures, sorry, they believe among the respective communities that these heroes are historical figures. What happens is that unique individuals are celebrated by society, and with time, their powers is exaggerated down the line to reach epic proportions. Thank you, and let's meet next class.